This week abroad.
For Liat as an airline,
Liat begs for tax break.
In Cameroon, when it comes to drugs, the answer is always repression.
Cameroon battles opioid crisis.
Technically, they are still at war.
And Kim Jong-un heads south. Hello and welcome to This Week Abroad. I'm Javon Keys. Let's go around the region. Regional carrier Liat is calling for governments to take a look at their aviation tax policies, as the airline has a 25% decline in regional travel due to the high cost. Chief Executive Officer Julie Reefers-Jones says these taxes often deter persons from traveling regionally.
The taxes, and this includes both airport and the taxes directly from the government, is acting as a significant deterrent to travel across the region. And for Liat as an airline, because we are connecting passengers across several territories, we are actually picking up taxes from 3 or 4 territories every time somebody flies from one destination to the next.
She says based on the recent study, the taxes are a large contributor to the rising cost of air travel across the Caribbean.
When we looked at our fares between 2009 and 2016, our base fares increased about 3%. The taxes over the same period increased about 56%, right? Now, what the passenger sees is not Liat's base fare. They're going to see the total package, and their reaction to buying a ticket to travel to Guadeloupe or to travel to Dominica is going to be impacted by that total bottom line picture.
The International Monetary Fund, IMF, is urging Guyana to revisit its tax legislations to ensure that the country gets greater proceeds from crude oil resources. That's why the Guyana Revenue Authority, GRA, is preparing to conduct audits on the financial statements of ExxonMobil. GRA Commissioner General Godfrey Stacia says multiple approaches will be taken to conduct the audit.
We've already notified Exxon of our intention to commence certain audits. And that is exactly where we are. As to the approach that we will take, it will be varying approaches. It's not a one approach. What I mean is that there's audits that would produce, in some cases, more revenues than if you go on the spot and do observation.
He says all aspects of the sector ought to be looked at in order to ensure that the tax collection is maximized.
When we are looking at oil and when we are looking at what we get from oil, unfortunately we just look and see what would be the 12.5% or what would be the half share. We don't even look and see what we're going to, the taxes that we're going to get from the contractors. We don't look at the economic activity that we're going to get from midstream activities and all these things. These are some of the things that we need to put our minds to. It's not only the profit share that we need to look at. We need to look at all the other avenues where we are going to get the tax.
The Caribbean has become reliant on plastics. However, Massy stores in St. Lucia are taking steps to reduce plastic use with the launch of the Reusable Shopping Bag campaign. Managing Director of Massy Stores, Martin Dorville, says despite the negative implications that may come with this move, the company is willing to take the plunge.
We believe we must take a bold step, notwithstanding some of the adverse impacts that might arise. So, how is that going to impact us? Some people might decide that they don't want to shop at Massy. But we believe that because of the strength of this higher purpose, that our customers will get over it and our customers will rally with us. Some people may agitate when they get to the cash register and they realize I don't have my reusable bag. And that we believe also customers will get over that hurdle.
In the meantime, Executive Chair in charge of the retail line of Massy Holdings Limited, Thomas Panton, says the move is necessary to protect the environment, and he hopes customers will see this change as being worth it.
We had to take a decision to bet on our customers, understanding the needs to change their behaviors, the need to accept that life will be a little different without plastic bags, and to understand that as as we go through this process of change, and change is very difficult for everybody, but as we go through this process of change, that it will be well worth it.
After 6 decades under the leadership of the Castro family, Cuba has a president whose last name is not Castro. Raul Castro has stepped down, being replaced by Miguel Diaz-Canel. However, despite the power shift, the new president assured that the Castro legacy is in good hands, and Raul will still play a key role in the country's running.
The generation of Fidel and Raul remains intact. Comrade Army General Raul Castro will remain the first secretary of the Communist Party, and as such will lead the major decisions of our country now and in the future.
When the 8th Party Congress ends and the gradual and orderly transfer of our main responsibilities is made to the new generations, it is then, if my health allows, that I will become just one more soldier, along with the Cuban people, defending this revolution.
When we come back, an opioid crisis grips Cameroon. We'll have the details after the break. Welcome back to This Week Abroad. Opioids are drugs that act on the nervous system to relieve pain. Continued use can lead to physical dependence and withdrawal symptoms. These drugs are generally prescribed by a physician. However, there is a black market providing the population in Cameroon with them at a low cost. More in this report.
An aerial view of Cameroon's capital, Yaoundé. In the heart of the city is the central market, a place where one can find almost anything, including fake medicine. For safety reasons, we have to be discreet and film with a hidden camera. We follow Fabrice a few meters ahead of us in a shirt and jeans. The illicit drug vendor agreed to talk to us as long as we hid his face. Through the maze of the market, he leads us up to his shop. Away from the public eye, he shows us his flagship product, which contains the molecule tramadol. It has an effect similar to morphine and in high doses a sought-after narcotic.
C'est l'un des produits même les plus sollicités pour le moment. Généralement, c'est les élèves, les policiers, les militaires, les étudiants, les motomanes même. Ils en consomment beaucoup. Nous avons ce qu'on appelle les passeurs. C'est comme ça qu'on peut les appeler. Eux, ils viennent, ils prennent en gros et puis c'est eux qui savent comment ils vont dispatcher ça dans les quartiers.
Tramadol is increasingly becoming the recreational drug of choice in the country. After a long conversation, Marius, a young user of tramadol, finally accepted to speak on camera. He explains the euphoric effect it has on him and his friends.
Quand moi je prends, je me sens franchement courageux et fort. Par jour, je peux prendre 4. Mais j'en connais des amis, quand ils prennent ça, eux, ils deviennent trop agressifs. Bon, overdose aussi. J'en connais beaucoup d'amis qui sont morts de ça.
Illicit sales of tramadol are on the rise in West and Central Africa. These photos illustrate cargo seized by Ivorian authorities. While millions of tablets are flooding the market, the United Nations are now sounding the alarm. Tramadol is no longer just the so-called jihad drug used by terror groups in the region. Hundreds of kilometers from the Sahel, tramadol, generally made in India, is appealing to a new market. Its ease of access has become a concern in some schools in Cameroon, like this high school on the outskirts of the city.
Here in our school, we have students who take tramadol pills, and we've seen how violent some of them have become. They're aggressive, not only with their peers, but also with teachers and adults. One such student raped an 8-year-old girl.
Dans notre établissement, il y a certains élèves qui consommaient de la drogue, et ce n'est pas du tout important. Ça ne donne rien de bon.
Raising awareness in schools before it's too late. These kinds of initiatives are still rare in Cameroon, according to Titus, who's leading the day's proceedings.
In Cameroon, when it comes to drugs, the answer is always repression. So the simple fact of having a principal inviting a group like ours to talk with his students, that's already a very positive thing.
The risk of addiction to tramadol and other drugs is a big threat to the country's crippling public health sector. There's only one rehab centre in the country. It's situated in this district of Douala, Cameroon's second biggest city. Andre is the man behind the project. Since the centre was opened 3 years ago, he has welcomed nearly 600 young addicts.
It's always because of ignorance or curiosity that young people end up having to come here. Repression is not the ideal solution when it comes to finding an answer to drug abuse. These kids who take drugs are not a lost cause. Their families have to understand that these people are ill. They're people who often ignore the fact that they're ill. And all of us, we have to help this patient to change and heal.
Listening sessions are held several times a week. It's a rare space for young addicts like 20-year-old Arnaud, who received treatment for cannabis addiction.
At first, detox was really difficult because I was being cut off from substances I've spent the last 5 years consuming every day. I spent 3 weeks here. They let me out after I showed them my project for the future. I've returned to school and I've decided to stop smoking.
The United Nations Office for Drugs and Crime estimates between 22 and 72 million adults in Africa consume drugs. The gap in statistics is attributed to the shortcomings of member states reporting to the UNODC. Nevertheless, these figures make the continent a target for drug traffickers who see a gigantic market for potential customers.
We go further abroad in a bit, but first, here's a look at how some of the major international commodities ended trading this week. When we come back, is peace on the horizon for North and South Korea? International stories are next. Welcome back to This Week Abroad. After days of backlash over the treatment of members of the Windrush generation, the British government has agreed to grant them citizenship. Compensation may be also on the cards for those affected. Here's more.
The community around here was brilliant.
Hubert Howard arrived proudly in the UK aged 3 as part of the Windrush generation. But the hopes and dreams of the boy in this photo have been casually crushed by a nightmare of bureaucracy after the Home Office refused him leave to remain.
It's still happening. I can't sleep at nights. I just can't sleep at nights. It's like in the morning, it's like I've turned nocturnal.
Despite having his mother's passport with his name in it, denied his own papers, Hubert lost his job and couldn't even travel to Jamaica for his mother's funeral.
Since she's passed away 2006, I haven't even been by her graveside. I haven't been there at all, and that is what's really tearing me up.
Today, the Home Secretary acknowledged the Windrush injustices should never have been allowed to happen.
So I want to enable the Windrush generation to acquire the status that they deserve, British citizenship, quickly, at no cost and with proactive assistance through the process.
So from now on, citizenship fees will be waived for the Windrush generation. There will be no requirement for them to take language or knowledge tests. And Amber Rudd also promised that compensation will be available for those who'd suffered losses.
We await to hear how those people will have their life repaired. Heart-rending cases. They deserve detail on the kind of justice that they now are going to get.
This is a failure by successive governments.
Hubert listened to the Home Secretary's promises. I asked him whether compensation could possibly compensate him.
How is this compensation going to work? They've got to sort out the way they're going to compensate, and they've got to compensate properly. Because, I felt that from 2012, my life has been lost.
An unintended impact, the Home Secretary called it, and we're only just starting to find out how many lives like Hubert's have been devastated as a result.
After about a year in office, French President Emmanuel Macron made his first official state visit to the United States of America a few days ago. And at the top of the agenda was the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran. More in this report.
Before getting down to work as a politician and a statesman, Emmanuel Macron decided to be a tourist, taking the opportunity of a sunny spring day in Washington to walk to the Lincoln Memorial. The French president arrived a few hours earlier with a warm greeting, but a clear agenda.
We will have the opportunity to discuss a lot of bilateral issues and to discuss about our security, about trade, and a lot of multilateral issues very important for our countries and beyond our two countries.
At the White House, he was welcomed for the first official state visit of the Trump presidency. Donald Trump gets on well with Emmanuel Macron, but in the talks that are to follow, the French president wants to convince him to stay inside the Iran nuclear deal, not to abandon it, and to also think again about possible trade tariffs on European goods. The White House press secretary seemed to indicate there was little chance of change on Iran.
But the president has been extremely clear that he thinks it's a bad deal. That certainly has not changed.
And speaking in Canada, the current acting US Secretary of State claims the nuclear deal is at risk because of Iran's actions.
The United States has significant concerns with Iran, with its ballistic missiles program, its destabilizing malign influence in the region, in Yemen, in Syria and elsewhere.
Iran's foreign minister is carrying out his own tour in the US. International inspectors say Iran is in full compliance, and he warns the US collapsing the deal could have consequences. Politically, it would be difficult for Donald Trump not to abandon the Iran nuclear deal, given his previous statements. The first chance for President Macron to raise the issue was at Mount Vernon, George Washington's home, at a private dinner for the two men and their wives. He will hope when German Chancellor Angela Merkel arrives for her own visit in the coming days, Donald Trump might have something positive to say. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, at the White House.
No more war. That's the declaration after years of hostility between both North and South Korea. The leaders have initiated talks in an historical summit aimed at bringing peace to the Korean peninsula. Al Jazeera's James Bays reports.
Technically, they are still at war, but this was carefully choreographed to create a new atmosphere of peace. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un entered from the north side of the demarcation line. The South Korean President Moon Jae-in waited at the concrete block that marks the start of his country's territory. A historic handshake, and then something in all the years since the Korean War that Kim's father and grandfather never did, a North Korean leader crossing into South Korea. It was followed by a reciprocal gesture, Moon Jae-in very briefly crossing the line into the north. Both leaders seemed relaxed and were smiling, but of course they hope this summit is only the start of a process, and that's likely to be complicated and will involve difficult negotiations.
Today in this meeting, I hope that there is new history written with regards to peaceful prosperity, and I will approach this with the feeling of a brand new start. I'd like to discuss all issues as standing honestly and frankly. I would like to take this opportunity to say that I hope to have a very good conversation with President Moon today. Honest, frank and with intent.
When the Supreme Leader crossed the demarcation line on this historic moment, there is immense expectation on us all over the world, and I hope this discussion is productive. Let's approach this discussion boldly and wishing for peace. And I like to give something very big to the people looking at us. We have all day to talk, and let's do so and make up for the 10 years that we have let past.
Over lunch, the North Korean leader and his fast-moving security detail headed back to the north side so he could confer with other members of his delegation. Then, a few hours later, a symbolic moment of tree planting using earth from mountains in the north and the south and water from the two biggest rivers on both sides. Another image filled with symbolism as the two crossed a footbridge together. Then, in a move highly unusual in international diplomacy, they stopped. The two leaders sitting face to face alone with not even note takers for over half an hour, ironing out the final issues of their declaration. It was signed and they made these statements.
It's very significant that North Korea took a measure of freezing its nuclear activities first. It will be a valuable beginning for the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Kim Jong-un and I declare that there will be no more war on the Korean peninsula and a new age of peace has begun.
I feel that we are part of one family, and both countries will have a new policy of cooperation. After years of disputes, we are here today to say that nothing will make us different again. And I will say this, the North Koreans and the South Koreans are now sharing one spot on the map, and they represent one country in one way or another, and we hope to achieve the ambitions and hopes of both countries.
The fact that this summit took place in itself is historic, but if some of the things in this declaration actually happen, they too will be landmark developments. A formal end to the Korean War, a peace treaty between North Korea and South Korea, and a return visit by President Moon to Pyongyang in the fall. One part of the agreement, though, will face particular scrutiny, and that's the pledge of denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. The language used in the declaration gives no concrete details and no timeline. The wives of the Korean leaders joined the delegations for a formal banquet to end a long day of diplomacy. But this is only the start of a lengthy and very difficult process. James Bays, Al Jazeera, Paju in South Korea.
That's it for This Week Abroad. Thanks for joining us. We're back next week with more regional and international stories. But remember, catch BATV News weeknights at 7:30 p.m. I'm Javon Keys. Pleasant viewing.